Hello and welcome back to our novel study of the Phantom Tollbooth. Today we're doing chapter 15, which is called This Way to Infinity. Now, infinity is a word you've probably heard before, so let's just get right to it and get that word out of the way. When something is infinite as an adjective, that's describing it as limitless or endless, impossible to measure or calculate. But then if we change the ending, we have infinity, which is a noun. And infinity is the state or quality of being infinite. But in this chapter, of course, the book is going to take this figurative idea of infinity and make it a real place. Now, infinity is one of those weird concepts. It means something that does not have an end, something that goes on forever, because of the Latin root fin, which means end, and the prefix in, which means not or no, so no end. Now, we can understand the idea of there being no end, of there being infinity, but we really can't comprehend it. We really can't experience infinity. As far as we know, in our world, in our reality, things do have an end and things change. So we know that infinity is out there, but we don't really know how to fully understand it. Think of it this way. Think of the number 1 million. Now, you know what 1 million looks like if you write it out, 1 and 6 zeros, but can you really see a million objects in your head? You can't. So once we get to those bigger, larger concepts, we can understand them a little bit, but we can't fully comprehend them, just like infinity. But I don't want to take forever with that explanation, so let's start the chapter. Chapter 15, This Way to Infinity. Into the cavern rushed 8 of the strongest miners, carrying an immense cauldron which bubbled and sizzled and sent great clouds of savory steam spiraling slowly to the ceiling. A sweet yet pungent aroma, that's a strong smell, hung in the air and drifted easily from one anxious nose to the other, stopping only long enough to make several mouths water and a few stomachs growl. Milo, Tock, and the humbug watched eagerly as the rest of the workers put down their tools and gathered around the big pot to help themselves. So a cauldron is one of those giant pots. You've probably seen it in movies or cartoons. "Perhaps you'd care for something to eat?" said the Mathemagician, offering each of them a heaping bowlful. "Yes, sir," said Milo, who was beside himself with hunger. "Thank you," added Tock. The humbug made no reply, for he was already too busy eating, and in a moment the three of them had finished absolutely everything they'd been given. "Please, have another portion," said the Mathemagician, filling their bowls once more. And as quickly as they'd finished the second one was emptied too. "Don't stop now," he insisted, serving them again, and again, and again, and again, and again. "How very strange," thought Milo as he finished his 7th helping. "Each one I eat makes me a little hungrier than the one before." "Do have some more," suggested the Mathemagician, and they continued to eat just as fast as he filled the plates. After Milo had eaten 9 portions, Tock 11, and the humbug, without once stopping to look up, 23, the Mathemagician blew his whistle for a second time, and immediately the pot was removed and the miners returned to work. "Ugh!" gasped the bug, suddenly realizing that he was 23 times hungrier than when he started. "I think I'm starving." "Me too," complained Milo, whose stomach felt as empty as he could ever remember. "And I ate so much." "Yes, it was delicious, wasn't it?" agreed the pleased dodecahedron, wiping the gravy from several of his mouths. "It's the specialty of the kingdom, subtraction stew." And of course you're going to have to know about subtraction stew for the quiz. "I have more of an appetite than when I began," said Tock, leaning weakly against one of the larger rocks. "Certainly," replied the Mathemagician. What did you expect? The more you eat, the hungrier you get. Everyone knows that. They do, said Milo doubtfully. Then how do you ever get enough? Enough? He said impatiently. Here in Digitopolis, we have our meals when we're full and eat until we're hungry. That way, when you don't have anything at all, you have more than enough. It's a very economical system. You must have been quite stuffed to have eaten so much. It's completely logical, explained the dodecahedron. The more you want, the less you get. And the less you get, the more you have. Simple arithmetic, that's all. Suppose you had something and added something to it. What would that make? More, said Milo quickly. Quite correct, he nodded. Now, suppose you had something and added nothing to it. What would you have? The same, he answered again, without much conviction. Splendid, cried the dodecahedron. And suppose you had something and added less than nothing to it. What would you have then? Famine, roared the anguished humbug, who suddenly realized that that was exactly what he'd eaten 23 bowls of. It's not as bad as all that, said the dodecahedron from his most sympathetic face. In a few hours you'll be nice and full again, just in time for dinner. Now, sympathetic is, of course, one of your vocabulary words. It means feeling, showing, or expressing compassion for another's situation. It's when you sort of feel bad because they're going through something. Oh dear, said Milo sadly and softly. I only eat when I'm hungry. What a curious idea, said the mathemagician, raising his staff over his head and scrubbing the rubber end back and forth several times on the ceiling. The next thing you'll have us believe is that you only sleep when you're tired. And by the time he'd finished the sentence, the cavern, the miners, and the dodecahedron had vanished, leaving just the four of them standing in the mathemagician's workshop. I often find, he casually explained to his dazed visitors, that the best way to get from one place to another is to erase everything and begin again. Please, make yourself at home. Now let's just pause there. I do love the way that the mathemagician travels by erasing what's around him, and then as soon as he erases what's around him, the place where he wants to be is right behind that. Do you always travel that way? Asked Milo as he glanced curiously at the strange circular room, whose 16 tiny arched windows corresponded exactly to the 16 points of the compass. Around the entire circumference were numbers from 0 to 360, marking the degrees of the circle. And on the floor, walls, tables, chairs, desks, cabinets, and ceiling were labels showing their heights, widths, depths, and distances to and from each other. To one side was a gigantic notepad set on an artist's easel, and from hooks and strings hung a collection of scales, rulers, measures, weights, tapes, and all sorts of other devices for measuring any number of things in any possible way. Now, I read pretty fast through that paragraph, but that's an important paragraph to understand, especially for the quiz coming up. So let's take it one step at a time, go back to the beginning, and I hope that you were visualizing the Mathemagician's Workshop. The first thing we learn about it is that it's a circular room and that the circumference of the room is marked by 360 degrees. Well, circumference is a word for the distance around a circle. And when we measure circles, we divide them evenly, just like we do a ruler, except that it's round. And when we mark the circle evenly, we call those marks degrees. So we don't measure a circle in inches or feet. We measure circles in degrees. And if you mark a circle evenly all the way around, it comes out to 360 degrees. So 180 degrees is half of a circle. So you might have heard the idiom, a complete 180. And that doesn't mean that somebody literally turns halfway around. It means that they might have changed something that they were doing or a way that they behaved, and now they do the opposite. Because if you only turn halfway around, you're facing the opposite direction, 180 degrees. But the magician's workshop is a full circle, 360 degrees, and those markings are all along the wall. And then it says that there are 16 arched windows that represent the directions of a compass. Now, you know that a compass on a map has north, south, west, and east usually. Those are the four main, what we call cardinal directions. But you have others. You have northwest and northeast and southwest and southeast. And then it gets even more detailed with this animation that I will show you right now. So you have actually 16 actual directions that are shown on what we call a compass rose. And in his office, those windows are aligned around in exactly the 16 parts of the compass. And then it says that all of the furniture in the room, everything in the room has a label on it which tells its length, its width, its height, its depth, and how far away it is from every other object in the room. Now imagine what a complicated label that must be. And it's on every single object, and every single object has its distance from every other object in the room. And of course the giant notepad set on an artist's easel. You know what an easel is, that stand that artists paint on a canvas with. And finally, hanging from hooks and strings is a collection of measuring devices of all kinds. You need to remember every single one of those details for the quiz. Let's go back to Milo's question at the beginning of that paragraph now to remind ourselves. Do you always travel that way? No, indeed, replied the mathematician, and this time he raised the sharpened end of his staff, drew a thin straight line in the air, and then walked gracefully across it from one side of the room to the other. Most of the time I take the shortest distance between any 2 points, which by the way is in math a line. A line is the shortest distance between 2 points. And of course, when I should be in several places at once, he remarked, writing 7 times 1 equals 7 carefully on the notepad, I simply multiply. Suddenly, there were 7 mathematicians standing side by side, and each one looked exactly like the other. How did you do that? Gasped Milo. There's nothing to it, they all said in chorus. If you have a magic staff. Then 6 of them canceled themselves out and simply disappeared. But it's only a big pencil, the humbug objected, tapping at it with his cane. True enough, agreed the mathematician, but once you learn to use it, there's no end to what you can do. The mathematician makes a very important point, which is a main idea in this book about math, which is that if you have the right tools and you know how to use them correctly, the possibilities for discovery are endless. Think of all of the incredible discoveries about the universe and our world and all the inventions and theories and equations. All of that was made possible by tools that we learned to use, from a simple pencil to do complex calculations with to an advanced rocket that can take us to space. Let's continue. Can you make things disappear? Asked Milo excitedly. Why, certainly, he said, striding over to the easel. Just step a little closer and watch carefully. After demonstrating that there was nothing up his sleeves, in his hat, or behind his back, he wrote quickly. 4 plus 9 minus 2 times 16 plus 1 divided by 3 times 6 minus 67 plus 8 times 2 minus 3 plus 26 minus 1 divided by 34 plus 3 divided by 7 plus 2 minus 5 equals... Then he looked up expectantly. 17! Shouted the bug, who always managed to be first with the wrong answer. Now take a pause there. Do you know how to solve that problem? Well, if you are in 5th grade math, you've probably heard of something called PEMDAS, which is the order of operations, meaning that you have to do these in a certain order in order to get the correct answer. And PEMDAS works like parentheses first, then exponents, then multiply, then divide, then add, and then subtract. So your teachers probably taught you an acronym to help you remember the order of operations, which is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. But before I was a reading teacher and I taught math for a year, I used to teach my students, please excuse Mr. D's awful singing. Now, I'm going to give you an opportunity to pause this and try and solve that using PEMDAS if you want. Start with whatever's in parentheses. There's nothing in parentheses there. There are also no exponents, so you can start by multiplying and see what answer you get and then unpause and come right back. Okay, so what answer did you get? Let's see if you were correct. It all comes to 0, corrected Milo. Precisely, said the Mathemagician, making a very theatrical bow, and the entire line of numbers vanished before their eyes. So if you did that problem correctly, and you followed the order of operations correctly, you would find that all of those calculations come out to 0. And Milo figured it out. Now, is there anything else you'd like to see? Yes, please, said Milo. Can you show me the biggest number there is? I'd be delighted, he replied, opening one of the closet doors. We keep it right here. It took 4 miners just to dig it out. Inside was the biggest 3 Milo had ever seen. It was fully twice as high as the Mathemagician. No, that's not what I mean, objected Milo. Can you show me the longest number there is? Surely, said the Mathemagician, opening another door. Here it is. It took 3 carts to carry it here. Inside this closet was the longest 8 imaginable. It was just about as wide as the 3 was high. No, that's not what I mean either, he said, looking helplessly at Tok. I think what you would like to see, said the dog, scratching himself just under 4:30, is the number of greatest possible magnitude. Well, why didn't you say so? Said the Mathemagician, who was busily measuring the edge of a raindrop. What's the greatest number you can think of? 9,999,999,999,999, recited Milo breathlessly. Very good, said the Mathemagician. Now add 1 to it. Now add 1 again, he repeated when Milo had added the previous one. Now add 1 again. 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 Now add... But when can I stop? Pleaded Milo. Never, said the Mathemagician with a little smile, for the number you want is always at least 1 more than the number you've got. And it's so large that if you started saying it yesterday, you wouldn't finish it tomorrow. Where could you ever find a number so big? Scoffed the humbug. In the same place they have the smallest number there is, he answered helpfully, and you know what that is. Certainly, said the bug, suddenly remembering something to do at the other end of the room. 1/1,000,000th? Asked Milo, trying to think of the smallest fraction possible. Almost, said the Mathemagician. Now divide it in half. Now divide it in half again. 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 Now divide... Oh dear, shouted Milo, holding his hands to his ears. "Doesn't that ever stop either?" "How can it?" said the mathematician, "when you can always take half of whatever you have left until it's so small that if you started to say it right now, you'd finish even before you began?" "Where could you keep anything so tiny?" Milo asked, trying very hard to imagine such a thing. The mathematician stopped what he was doing and explained simply, "Why, it's in a box that's so small you can't see it. And that's kept in a drawer that's so small you can't see it, in a dresser that's so small you can't see it, in a house that's so small you can't see it, on a street that's so small you can't see it, in a city that's so small you can't see it, which is part of a country that's so small you can't see it, in a world that's so small you can't see it." Then he sat down, fanned himself with a handkerchief, and continued, "Then, of course, we keep the whole thing in another box that's so small you can't see it, and, if you follow me, I'll show you where to find it." They walked to one of the small windows, and there, tied to the sill, was one end of a line that stretched along the ground and into the distance until completely out of sight. "Just follow that line forever," said the mathematician, "and when you reach the end, turn left. There you'll find the land of infinity, where the tallest, the shortest, the biggest, the smallest, and the most and the least of everything are kept." "I really don't have that much time," said Milo anxiously. "Isn't there a quicker way?" "Well, you might try this flight of stairs," he suggested, opening another door and pointing up. "It goes there too." Milo bounded across the room and started up the stairs, 2 at a time. "Wait for me, please," he shouted to Talk and the Humbug. "I'll be gone just a few minutes." Now, that last line is something that we would call a paradox, because if he's going to the land of infinity, then how can he be gone for only a few minutes? So a paradox is something that seems like it doesn't make any logical sense, but then the more you think about it and analyze it, it actually does turn out to be true. So this is a paradox, and we're going to find out all about that in the next chapter. See you then.